Hi, welcome. My name's John Allen, and I'm host of a program called Out in New Haven, where once a month we take a different topic of interest to the LGBTQ community in New Haven and Connecticut and explore it. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics, which is the arts in New Haven and Connecticut, but with a twist. We're going to talk about queer arts. And in New Haven and Connecticut, we're so fortunate to live in such a culturally rich community. We have world-class museums and theaters. We have many venues. We have at the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, we have the first public museum in the country. And there are so many different places that people can explore our rich cultural heritage. And today we're going to talk about queer arts, and I'm delighted that we have three young artists who identify as queer working and living in New Haven and sharing their art. We have Daniel Eugene, who is an artist, a poet, and a designer. We have Luis Antonio, who's a choreographer and dancer, and Dante Gennaro Jr., who is an author. All three of these guys are friends. They work together, and we're just delighted to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, for coming out.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Right. So I'd like to just start off with, what do you think is queer art, or what makes art queer? And Daniel, I think this would be a good start for you.
Sure. Well, when we talked earlier, I had mentioned art, I think, if it's functioning in its capacity as art, is queer just by nature. And what I mean by that is it tends to break up old modes of thinking and introduce new ideas into the conversation that bring the conversation forward. So I think maybe saying queer arts is a little bit redundant maybe, but I think art is queer by nature, and that identifying as a queer artist, I think, is just, you know, my themes are queer, I think you could say, and that being queer and bringing the conversation forward into queer arts, I think, is probably the most important function of art when it is successful, is that it is introducing new ideas, and it's allowing for more to be included in what is being done in the effect. This is my roundabout answer today.
Well, I think when
I'm warming up.
This might be a little bit of a generational consideration, but when I think of queer art, I tend to think in terms of LGBTQ, people that are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and questioning, queer and questioning. And so when I think of queer art, I go immediately to artists like John Waters or Andy Warhol or Alison Bechdel, people such as that. But I think you know, in talking with you, that queer seems to be so much more encompassing, and it also that you don't even have to be part of the LGBT community to have queer art.
Mm-hmm.
I think it all depends on the focus too, like what the focus is on the art, because I know queer artists that don't focus on queer themes, and I know straight artists that focus on queer themes, you know, so it all depends on what the focus is, you know, that the artist trying to put out. Yeah.
As well as I think that the mindset of the person who's viewing it, and when they watch something or they're looking at something, if it gets them thinking somewhat out of that heteronormative, I think that everybody around the United States tends to be oversaturated with, I think that would be, for me, making a queer art.
So just getting out of the, as you said, heteronormative thinking.
Yeah.
And what does that mean? What does it mean to you, a heteronormative thinking?
I could use an example, actually. So in my show Escapade, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, straight people came to it, and I had drag queens in the show, and you know, them as hetero, they weren't sure if they were a real woman or a man, you know, so they, you know, this person told me that they were there trying to figure out who they, you know, what that person was, and at one point they had to let that go and just enjoy the show for what it is, you know, so it's that thinking in your head, it's just like, do I let go of what I know, or do I just take something else in and let it, you know, motivate thoughts in me? That makes sense? Yeah.
And I know that that's something I think identifying as a gay man growing up, you're sort of surrounded by, well, at least for me, I grew up in a smaller town in Connecticut, and so identifying as gay wasn't something that a lot of people around me were also going through, so I felt sort of isolated. And then I think, you know, you just kind of get used to seeing things like in books and in movies, it's tends to be a male and female, you know, character who are falling in love, or these sort of stories that you see your friends sort of going through and having a hard time as a gay individual. You don't tend to relate, I think, completely. So that's where the heteronormity kind of falls into place.
Well, I know if you go down the street to the Yale University Art Gallery and you see some of the masters there, you might see figures of female subjects and male subjects, or female nudes and male nudes, and so I would think that that would tend to be very heteronormative, and yet I wonder how you put a queer twist to it.
I think it depends also when the art was created. So if you look back in time through Greek and Roman cultures where homosexual activities weren't necessarily as taboo or stigmatized as they are today, you know, the human body was just looked at as this beautiful form of art, and we have some amazing artists who were able to capture the human body and carve it in marble or paint it on these beautiful canvases. So yeah, I think over time society sort of changes people's views on whether or not something heterosexual or homosexual is appropriate or inappropriate, or having different labels on it. I think that just is very fluid with the time.
When I think of queer art, I always immediately want to think of what reminds me of the sexual minority community. And that's when that's something that's erotic, something that is sexual, or evokes a sexual expression. And so I wonder, do you think that that's what queer art really is about?
I would say that it has a lot to do with, I mean, something like sex positivity or sexual affirmation, whereas, I mean, eroticism and sexuality has been represented in art since the very beginning, but usually in a context that has to do with the fall in the Garden of Eden, or lust, the 7 deadly sins. It's kind of shrouded in this kind of not necessarily positive, but like tormenting or, you know, tumultuousness. Whereas I think in queer art, and representations of eroticism and sexuality in queer art, you see overwhelmingly affirmation and celebration, and even in the more deviant things, like you see a representation of the positivity and like the transformative kind of cathartic revelation that happens through erotic expression and sexual expression.
And the art is really transformative. I know that when I go and see an exhibit or whatever, I feel transformed because of it. When you see something of beauty or something that represents what my life, how I can relate to the artwork, and it represents my life. And that is a transformative experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, not to interrupt, but just to touch on that, when you talk about how you feel like there's this sexual component to it, because obviously homosexuality is a sexual component, I'm curious if there was just a family portrait with two dads or two moms, if that would be considered queer art, and in this sort of a day. That's. I mean, it's interesting that you brought up the whole sexual aspect of it, because it's true. But what about, the other aspects? I think that's what we were talking about when I said it's a big part. But, if you saw a family portrait with, a
queer
gay
family
female,
or a gay
right? Would that be
couple.
considered gay art?
Yeah.
Even if it was
I
like a
wouldn't
painted-
necessarily think that it was queer art unless it was in a queer art show,
Yeah.
an exhibition.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Well, I think this is a good time to talk about, your relationship together and what work you guys are planning that you do together, or that some of the works that you've done. Yeah. I know that there's some books that have come out recently, and you've got performances that you're doing on a regular basis, and so I don't know if
I think we should start the timeline with.
yeah, let's hear
yeah.
a brief bit about each one of your projects.
Well, I think the way we've mostly been collaborating is with, I've been photographing a lot, and it has become a focus. The queer community in New Haven has become a focus for me taking photographs, and I believe in representation and the need for representation, and especially seeing the queer community in New Haven, how active and how engaged we are in social issues and human issues and issues of art and performance. I think it's become very important to me to be kind of a documentarian to that, and it's a power that I feel, or it's something I feel empowered to do holding a camera. So the project that I began initially was not really begun as a project, but it turned into a project because I committed to it, but I started photographing the drag shows at Partners at the beginning of the year in the early winter 2017. And it was a space that I experienced an overwhelming sense of iconoclasm and kind of breaking down of conventional ideas and kind of this restructuring of a normal that was, instead of it being a normal that's defined by reducing or being disinclusive, this normal was like inclusive and had a representation of everything in the room, So it got me very excited about what normal can mean in a queer space. And so I started photographing that space and started introducing myself to the artists and the performers, the drag queens, and gauging their interest in whether or not they would want to be involved as collaborators, as subjects, as performers, with me being the photographer.
Wonderful. And are you exhibiting that work?
Yes, I'm going to be exhibiting. I'm going to be doing an exhibition of those photographs, all from 2017, all taken in Partners Cafe to correspond with the release of a book, a published document that I've recently gone to press with and done a limited printing of 500.
Wow.
So
where will the exhibition be?
This is going to be at my studio this upcoming weekend for the opening weekend of Citywide Open Studios in Westville Village.
Yeah, and Citywide Open Studios is where artists all around the region open up their studios for a weekend of, or it actually goes over 2 weekends, I believe.
It's the entire month of October, and
wow.
each weekend is a different destination location in New Haven geographically. I'm extremely excited about bringing drag to Westville, and
drag is popular.
it's popular, but I think it's extremely popular in events and in spaces that are art forward and art minded and attracting a crowd of art lovers and people who are interested in art. And then you bring this queer kind of power into the mix that is kind of unusual even for those who would otherwise be seen as kind
Well, if I may add, something that he's doing is that he's bringing drag to like the daytime. You know, and like our young gay community, you know, that cannot go to a club to see, you know, drag, are going to be able to go to his apartment and watch drag queens in his kitchen performing.
Wow.
You know, there's a lot of kids out there that love drag. You know, and something they can't see at midnight, they're going to be able to see in the daytime, which is amazing. I think. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But that's so great, and I think it's wonderful that you can allow young people who can't go to the clubs to be able to see that. So
it's important.
Yeah.
You know, because they need, you know, inspiration. They need someone to look up to.
Yeah.
You know. So.
Now I don't know if you're a drag performer, but I know you're a choreographer.
I did drag a long time ago, Miss Brittany.
Yeah. But you definitely are a working choreographer and dancer in New Haven, and so maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
I guess to keep going with, you know, so I have a show at Lyrical. Been there for 2 years now. It's my 5th time producing it, called Escapade.
Escapade.
Escapade, yes. Escapade, Experience the Madness. So I'm bringing it back for the 5th time, but this time it's revamped and reimagined. So I'm doing a Halloween twist, but instead of focusing on the gore of Halloween, I'm focusing on the emotional part that we deal with that is so scary to many of us, and we don't want to face. So I'm focusing on emotions like being lonely, falling in love, depression, anxiety, playing mind games. So that's where the madness comes from. You know, you drive yourself crazy, you know, by loving someone. You drive yourself crazy in your head. It's like, do I do this? Do I do it? So it's that's the focus of the show.
Where's that going to be?
It's going to be at Lyrical Theater.
Lyrical in
October
Westville.
27th and 28th.
Wonderful.
And I'll also be featuring NHV Drag.
Wonderful.
So something I do with my show is also a collaboration of different artists that come together. So I have drag artists, dancers, singers. Daniel's also going to be singing in the show, and I'm going to have him feature his artwork in the front room. So it kind of becomes like a fun house for adults and for teenagers. It is family friendly, and you travel through 3 different rooms, from the front room, which is like our gallery, into the bar area, and then into the theater.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it's an experience. Yeah.
And Dante, what about your project?
So I'm very happy and proud to announce that I've been working on the book actually for, since I conceived it about 7 years ago. I wrote the first draft 5 years ago, and now it is ready to be published and will be released at the end of October on my birthday, on Halloween.
How wonderful. What is this? Tell us about the book.
So it's the first of a series, and the name of it is called The Hazard Gene.
The Hazard Gene.
The Hazard Gene.
And it's the first of how many?
6. 6 books in the main series, and basically it's about these 5 families that all came from this one woman, this mother, and she had the ability that when she'd go to sleep at night, she would have premonitions of the future. And so on her deathbed, she calls over each of her 5 children and whispers in their ear her premonitions that she had for them, and then passes away. So after that, the 5 siblings form rivalries with one another and end up dividing this country into different territories where you know, this world sort of takes place. And so fast forwarding now to the current time, the main character Dylan is coming out to his family as a gay young man and to his girlfriend, and as he's coming out, he discovers that he has a supernatural ability. And
that's a superpower. his
What's
queerness?
You're gonna have to read it. I'm not telling. So he has,
suspense.
Can't tell you everything.
So he has this supernatural ability and learns that his family is a part of this secret underground war. And so while he's embracing his sexuality, he needs to master his ability in order to save his family from being annihilated.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm excited.
Now, is any of this autobiographical?
Well, I think even with like everything we do as far as artists go, you kind of put a little bit of yourself into it. So yeah, I touched a lot on my own personal experiences as well as some that I got from friends and some other people who I've talked to about it.
Yeah. Oh, how great. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. Where will the book be available?
On Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble, as well as my website, thehazardgene.com.
Oh, wow. How wonderful. Well, best of luck to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. You know, I was just reminded that when at the recent Pride event, that there was the show that there was one of the performances was actually of you, Daniel, performing a song, and I think Louis, you were dancing next to him, and I was just mesmerized by. Maybe you can talk just briefly about that, but how the audience, literally, I looked around the audience, and people were stopped to watch this performance. I was just so surprised by it, and it was you know, you singing "I Did It My Way" by Frank Sinatra.
Sure.
And you know, what was that like? Because it was just so, it seemed so unreal to be in a gay pride, an LGBT pride celebration, to have someone singing a Frank Sinatra song.
I mean, it was Luis came to me with the idea to sing "My Way." Is that right?
No.
How did
he actually was saying that he wanted to sing "My Way." How he thought the song was very poignant with what we're going through right now, and how us as artists we're doing things our way. So I was like, you know, that goes really well with the theme. I'm going with Escapade this time around, and I'm like, I think we should make it part of the show. So literally like the week before, I was like, let's put "My Way." You know, would you mind singing it? And I'm like, I'll dance, and yeah, and. You know, I'm a person that always break that fourth wall, and I do connect with the audience, and I saw them just like.
Oh, the audience had literally stopped. Everyone had stopped to see this presentation. It was unbelievable.
And it's a song that, you know, us as queer, you know, could, you know, definitely connect with. You know, so even though it's Frank Sinatra and it's an oldie, you know, it's very present to what we're doing right now.
And you certainly made it your own. That was what was so obvious. You know, I wondered, what are some of the places that people can go to that want to experience queer art? Or what are the venues that are in this area, or places that tend to spotlight that?
I mean, I would say certainly. Well, Lyric Hall is the first place that comes to mind.
Lyrical Theater. So I'm producing more. I'm the theater production manager over at Lyrical Theater, and I'm bringing in more queer artists to these shows. For Pride, we had a lesbian comedy show that Friday night. Escapade. Dante's gonna be doing his book release party there.
Wonderful.
I'm also I'm bringing a young director that just graduated, and she's queer. To giving her the opportunity to direct her own show, and I'm going to sponsor everything for her.
Wonderful.
And that's happening in February. We're doing a Spring Awakening. Summer Orlando, she's had her show this past weekend. So yeah, my goal is to feature queer artists at Lyrical Theater.
Wonderful.
And give them a home where they're able to.
Well, I know that the New Haven Pride Center is also a venue to host exhibitions, and I think, Daniel, you're going to have a show there. Of your artwork there.
Yes, I've been in touch with Patrick, and we're in discussion now about bringing an exhibition of photographs related to the NHV Drag project to the Pride Center.
Right. So that's wonderful. And you know, what do you think? Just in our remaining moments, what do you think is the future for queer arts in New Haven?
We're going to be splattered everywhere.
Yeah, hopefully expanding. I'd love to see, you know, it's kind of like a flip-flop for me, only because I love queer art, and I love the fact that we have, you know, kind of a claim to this, but I think like over time, just like we're kind of seeing right now in gay bars, over time it's like it kind of becomes sort of a norm, and then it loses its what's the word? It loses its
Outcastness, or
right
its-
of like
does it kind of become mainstream?
like a gathering, exactly. So
Wow.
I think the more that people are becoming exposed to it, which is wonderful, at the same time it'll eventually become normal and lose its maybe like power that it has right now, I think.
Well, to speak to that, the idea of normal being avant-garde, like avant-garde should be normal. Avant-garde is heralding the future normal. Avant-garde is what's challenging people to think more broadly and to think more of the times instead of conventions that are outmoded or outdated. So the idea, like taking the stigma away from normal, oh, you're so normal, that's basic. Be like, normal meaning you're avant-garde, you're challenging conventions, you are evolving traditions, you are participating in a movement. Like, let that be normalized in a
Wonderful.
way that I think, can serve the whole community and let queer be a
I-
part
With
of that.
that, we've run out of time. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry. But this has been great. And Dante, Gennaro, Luis, Antonio, and Daniel Eugene, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You're very welcome.